My name is Virginia Abram. I'm a senior studying history and minoring in journalism, and it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Michael Duran is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he specializes in Middle East security issues. He received his BA from Stanford University and his MA and PhD from Princeton University. Duran served in the George W. Bush administration as a senior director in the National Security Council with responsibility for the entire Middle East except Iraq. A former senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Dr. Duran has taught at NYU, Princeton, and the University of Central Florida. He has written for numerous publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the New York Post, USA Today, and the Los Angeles Times. He is the author of 3 books, including Pan-Arabism Before Nasser, Egyptian Power Politics and the Palestine Question, and Ike's Gamble, America's Rise to Dominance in the Middle East. Please join me in welcoming Michael Duran.
Thank you, Virginia, and thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to Hillsdale for hosting this. It's the first time I've ever been to Hillsdale. It's a great honor to be here. It's fabulous to see an institution like this. For me, it's fabulous because I'm a refugee, as Virginia alluded. I'm a refugee from academia, and I left about 15 years ago. My last teaching position was at Princeton, and when I left Princeton, the political correctness, the progressivism was already intolerable, and I had this naive idea back then that the pendulum was just going to swing, because it had gotten so ridiculous, I thought, 15 years ago, that the pendulum had to swing. But everything that I see and everything that I hear from my friends is that no, actually the pendulum is not swinging. It just continues, and all of the major institutions, especially in the humanities and social sciences, all of the major institutions, almost all of American academia is just speaking with one monotone voice. And so an institution like Hillsdale that has something different to say and says it clearly and with conviction, it punches way above its weight. It's a fascinating thing, and it's just great to be here and be part of this. I thank you for having me. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you about Trump and the Middle East, or really the United States and the Middle East. But what I intend to do here is argue that what Donald Trump is doing in the Middle East makes an enormous amount of sense. It is coherent, intelligent, and successful. And that is not something that you hear very often, and I would like to go into some depth here to explain to you why I think that. Now, if you've been following the news lately, you know that just recently the president had on the south lawn of the White House a signing ceremony with Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, where they signed on to what is being called the Abraham Accords. Now, if you followed the press on this, if you read the New York Times, then the interpretation that you heard was that this is basically the story of the emperor's new clothes. That Donald Trump was up there in the White House lawn thinking that he was wearing resplendent robes of a peacemaker, when actually not that much was going on. Yes, it wasn't a bad thing that the UAE and Bahrain were making peace with Israel, but were they really ever at war with Israel? No. And, this is really just kind of a glitzy formalization of a status quo that we're all familiar with. And, oh, by the way, Donald Trump didn't have anything to do with it anyway. It was really Benjamin Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates who made it happen. Trump just played host to this garden party. Well, what I want to argue for you today is that indeed the emperor's new clothes is a proper lens through which to view that event, but only with the roles reversed. Trump really was wearing resplendent robes of a peacemaker, and the people who were naked were the critics. Now, if you've been following Trump's Middle East policies, and you've been following what the critics have been saying, then you know that at every stage, the critics have been saying that what he's doing is wrong-headed, it's counterproductive, and it's going to lead to war. And that's, from moment one, that was the case. Now, let me give you just a little example of the flavor of the analyses that we've been hearing. In early or late 2017, then Secretary of State Kerry was asked, Donald Trump was the president-elect, and he was asked, what if Trump moves the embassy to Jerusalem? What will happen? And John Kerry said, this is John Kerry as Secretary of State. He said, you'd have an explosion, an absolute explosion in the region. Not just in the West Bank and perhaps even in Israel itself, but throughout the region. So the whole Middle East is going to explode, and he goes on to suggest that maybe even the peace agreements between Israel and Egypt and Jordan might fall apart as a result. Now, that line of analysis has pursued Trump on everything he's done. Moving the embassy from Jerusalem, recognizing the Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, getting out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, reimposing sanctions on Iran, killing Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Every time he's done something like this, we've been told the prediction ahead of time has been that it's going to lead to war. Trump is alienating allies. It's going to lead to war. It's counterproductive. In the case of Qasem Soleimani, after he did it, it was a mistake. That's also is going to lead to war. None of this has come true. Now, you can dismiss, or you can explain some of this absolutely horrendous prediction, track record of prediction, as just partisan politics. We live in a very polarized moment. Trump is a polarizing figure. Anything he does is going to be criticized, and it's absolutely true. But the interesting thing, it's absolutely true that some of this opposition can be just put down to politics, as politics is played. But in the case of the Middle East, that's not completely true. Because the predictions that somebody like John Kerry is making are also backed up, and you just have to trust me on this, they are also backed up by all of the experts on them, or a very large percentage of the experts, who are putting their opinions forward not simply for partisan political reasons. They actually believe what they're saying, but they're being proven wrong time and time again. And so that's what I want to dig into here a little bit. An interesting question, by the way, I'm told that students are going to ask me questions afterwards, so I don't know if you've already got your questions ready or if you're supposed to prepare them while I'm talking, so I'll help you out. If I don't get to it, ask me, how is it that Donald Trump, nobody has ever suggested that Donald Trump has a lot of patience for intelligence briefings or even he's not interested in the minute detail of policy. He has no reservoirs of experience on the Middle East. How is it that Donald Trump is getting it so right and the experts are getting it so wrong? It's a fascinating question. I'm going to kind of answer it here, but I have a feeling that I'm going to run out of time. So you can ask me the question and answer. I'd love to answer it, but I have a lot of other stuff I have to cover here. Okay. What I want to do, what I want to suggest to you is there are two paradigms for looking at the Middle East. These are policy paradigms, but they're also intellectual paradigms. And for the sake of the discussion, I'm going to call it the Obama paradigm and the Trump paradigm. But beware that is just a simplification. That there are people. It's not just simply Republicans and Democrats. The Obama paradigm is more prevalent among Democrats than it is among Republicans, but there are Republicans who see the world through what I'm calling the Obama paradigm. It's just sort of, there are two American lenses for seeing the Middle East. I'll explain to you, historically where they come from. Historically, I mean just in the last 10, 15 years, or starting with the Iraq War. When George W. Bush went into Iraq and the United States got bogged down, there developed among the foreign policy elite a sort of deep critique of everything that Bush had done wrong. And this was, again, primarily a Democratic critique, but there were also Republicans who shared it. And we have a document that sort of codifies, for all time, the critique of Bush's policy. And that document is the Baker-Hamilton Report. Just out of curiosity among the students here, anybody know what the Baker-Hamilton Report is? Just raise your hand. None of you do? Okay. The Baker-Hamilton Report was a congressionally mandated study of what's gone wrong in Iraq. So it's 2006. We're bogged down in Iraq. Things aren't going well. Congress says to Bush, you have to have a bipartisan study of how things have gone badly. And so the Baker-Hamilton Report is headed by Lee Hamilton of Indiana and James Baker, the former Secretary of State of George H.W. Bush. By the way, everyone thought that James Baker was George W. Bush's, because he had worked for Bush's father, that he was George W. Bush's ringer on the Baker-Hamilton Report, that he was there to do the bidding of Bush and to draft the report in such a way that would be helpful to Bush's agenda. Not true. Not true. James Baker has the Obama worldview, the Obama paradigm. Anyway, the Baker-Hamilton Report, by the way, was penned, the guy who actually wrote the words on the page, by Ben Rhodes. He worked for Lee Hamilton. Ben Rhodes goes on to be the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications of President Obama. He's a very significant figure in the Obama White House, part of Obama's inner circle. So what the Baker-Hamilton Report is it's not simply the critique of Bush from the foreign policy elite. It's also the blueprint of Obama's foreign policy. Now, the Baker-Hamilton Report has, it's worth looking at online. It's a little book. It's got hundreds of pages. None of them matter except about the first 5 pages. The rest of it is all window dressing. Another good question. I won't go into what I mean by that, but you might want to ask me about that, one of you enterprising students who doesn't want to think. Just ask me that question because it's kind of interesting. But all that matters in the Baker-Hamilton Report are the 5 major recommendations. And those are pull out of Iraq, pull the troops out of Iraq, just give up on this failed war. Plus up in Afghanistan, put more troops into Afghanistan, reach out to Iran, reach out to Syria, so engage Iran, engage Syria, and revitalize the Arab-Israeli peace process, in particular the Palestinian-Israeli peace process. Now, in these 5 recommendations is the essence of the alternative worldview, or the Obama worldview about the Middle East. And the basic idea, the basic perspective is this. The United States drove its military into Iraq, got bogged down, and in doing so, it threatened Syria and it threatened Iran. And at the same time, by the way, George W. Bush is also calling for democracy promotion around the world, and that's also alienating countries like Russia. Now, the fact of the matter is, this is the perspective, this is the Obama perspective. This is not, I'm speaking now in the perspective of the Baker-Hamilton report, not the perspective of Mike Duran. In this worldview, Iran and Syria and the United States have shared interests in Iraq. Iraq is right next to Iran, and why would Iran want to have a destabilized country on its borders? Obviously, it wants to stabilize Iraq, and the United States could work with Iran to stabilize Iraq if it didn't have its military there and the military wasn't threatening Iran. Iran is afraid the United States wants to carry out regime change against it. And so there's this reservoir of shared interests that the United States and Iran have, but because of our overly militaristic foreign policy, we have created a situation that doesn't allow us to benefit from the shared interests with the Iranians or with the Syrians. So if we just get out and we signal to the Iranians and the Syrians that we want to get out, then that will create a space in which we can start to have some creative diplomacy with them and stabilize the region. The Iranians then won't be working, and the Syrians won't be working to kill Americans as the Iranians were, or to destabilize Iraq at all. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, well, Bush, there's a hidden critique of Bush there. Bush is too close to the Israelis, and in particular to Ariel Sharon, who was the leader of Israel at the time. And combined, and the Israelis are too militaristic. So there's the combination of the U.S. militarized foreign policy in Iraq and the alliance with Israel is alienating Muslims worldwide. So we need to demonstrate to not just to the Palestinians, but also to the Muslims worldwide, that we are conciliatory and not aggressive. And so we need to do that. That will also, by the way, have a good effect on Syria, which, remember, we alienated by putting our forces into Iraq. So we're going to switch from military to diplomacy, and we are going to reach out to these actors that that Bush regards as malignant actors that need to be contained. We're actually going to start working with them while we revitalize the Arab-Israeli conflict. The bullet point about putting troops in Afghanistan, well, that's about Al-Qaeda. That 9/11, the Bush justified the war in Iraq because of 9/11, but Iraq had nothing to do with it. The real conflict is against Al-Qaeda. So what we need is narrow counterterrorism focused specifically at Al-Qaeda, and the larger agenda that Bush had in the Middle East we should abandon. That is that's the essence. That is the blueprint of the Obama foreign policy. Now, Obama, the single most important decision that President Obama made about the Middle East, he made before he ever was elected president. In fact, he made it before he was even officially the Democratic nominee. Before he ever talked to an ally, before he ever got an intelligence briefing, he made a key decision, and that kind of dictated every move he made thereafter. And we have a record of the moment when he made this decision. He was this is in 2008, and he is the presumptive nominee of the party. and he hasn't yet been officially made officially the nominee. And he goes on a congressional delegation to Iraq, and he meets there with David Petraeus, the commander of our troops in Iraq. And he tells Petraeus, if I'm elected president, I'm going to pull the troops out of Iraq. And Petraeus says to him, my best advice to you would be not to do that. Because if you do that, Iran will move in and Iran will take over. Iran will fill the vacuum as we leave. And Obama says, yes, I can see the map up there. They're sitting in Petraeus' office. He's got a map of Iraq on the wall, and he says, I can see the map. I understand that that's what's going to happen, but we have problems at home we have to worry about. We cannot afford to be involved in this war anymore. So the decision is, and this is in keeping with the Baker-Hamilton report, the decision is that what Obama is assuming is that Iran and the United States actually share a lot of interests. And if Iran understands that the United States is not going to be is not going to topple it, and that it doesn't intend to use the military that it has in Iraq against Iran, well, then there's all kinds of opportunities for diplomacy between Iran and the U.S. And Iran will stabilize Iraq in a way that that the United States can live with comfortably. That is the key decision that Obama made, because it was a decision not to contain Iran. Presidents prior to Obama saw the United States, there's two competing worldviews here. They saw the United States as the leader of a coalition of states in the Middle East whose goal, the goal of the coalition, was to contain malevolent actors, Iran first and foremost. Obama basically gave up on contain. Now, he inherited a huge number of policies and, let's say, an American posture that is going to work to contain Iran in a lot of ways. But you can't find a single decision that Obama ever made to actually contain Iran. And every decision that he made moved in the exact opposite direction. Now, what he has in mind here is the sort of if you imagine two different visions of the Middle East. One vision is the Middle East is a rectangular table. And on one side of the table is the United States and its allies. Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, you know all of them. And on the other side are the malevolent actors, Russia, Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and so forth. In that view, the job of the United States is to elevate the United States and its allies up over the malevolent actors on the other side. That's the head leading the coalition view. Obama views the Middle East as a round table. And sitting at the table are America's traditional allies, but also Russia, Iran, Syria, and so on. And all of these people at the table are stakeholders in Middle Eastern order. And the United States is there to bring everyone around the table to agreement on key issues. So what Obama is thinking is, I want to pull out of these wars, these mistaken wars that George W. Bush started, and I want to pull back from the Middle East. The Middle East doesn't matter that much anymore. I want to pull back. There's going to be some vacuum there. How are we going to fill the vacuum? We're going to fill the vacuum by rebalancing, and that is rebalancing between America's allies and America's enemies. And in fact, in an interview in the Atlantic magazine, Obama said, specifically with regard to Saudi Arabia, but it also applies to Israel and to Turkey and the other states, the other allies, that the Saudis need to learn to share the region with Iran. So think about that, because what he's saying is America's allies are the problem. America's allies are provoking Iran, just like the United States is provoking Iran with its forces in Iraq. So along with this Baker-Hamilton view of the Middle East, what I'm calling the Obama view, is a reading of Iran that is very prevalent in America's national security elite, which sees Iran as basically a defensive power and a status quo power, and and a pragmatic power with which the United States can operate. Now, this is the context in which you need to understand the Iran nuclear deal. Obama very cleverly sold the nuclear deal to the U.S. public as a narrow arms control agreement. And whenever anyone said, oh, but what you're doing is actually elevating Iran up, you're strengthening Iran against our allies, they say, nonsense, nonsense. We're stopping them from getting a bomb. And this is just an arms control agreement. It has nothing to do with anything else. It's a blatant lie. And this week of all weeks is very easy to show you that it's a blatant lie. Or let me be nicer to President Obama. An act of artful misdirection. The way I can prove that is that the conventional arms embargo on Iran is being lifted now by the JCPOA. This is why, if you've been following the news lately, you see President Trump is unilaterally imposing a conventional arms embargo. So if this was a narrow arms control agreement with respect to nuclear weapons, how come lifting the conventional arms embargo on Iran is part of it? And I could go through lots of other aspects of the agreement, both written and not written, show you that this is part of a larger conception of reconfiguring the American position in the region and the American position vis-a-vis Iran, and it has nothing to do with it's not primarily about nuclear weapons. And in fact, it doesn't stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb either. It actually creates a kind of a very clear pathway to a bomb for the Iranians. Now, why did he do this? Basically, what he did is Obama came to an agreement with the Iranians that would park the nuclear question off to one side for 8 to 10 years, until, long after Obama and long after the first term of the next president, or maybe even the second term of the next president. And he parked it off to one side because then he could affect this change where the United States becomes the power holding the balance between the different actors in the region rather than leading a coalition against Iran. He was getting the United States out of the Iran conflict. The problem is that all of America's allies and the American people don't like Iran's nuclear program. This is a domestic political issue. So he could not affect this sort of grand strategic change if he didn't park the nuclear question off to one side. Now, the problem, there are many problems with this conception as I see it. But one of the major and most immediate problems is that it enraged America's allies. Because for their point of view, the U.S. was just heading for the exits in the region, and it was empowering the Russians and the Iranians as it left. In 2015, right on the heels of the completion of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, the Russians and the Iranians put together a military alliance. I just realized I don't have a clock. I looked up to look for the clock, and there is no clock. How long have I been talking? About 5 minutes, right? Matt, how much longer do I have here? 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes? 15 if you want to. Okay, I got 20 more minutes. That's good. So, all that talk about minutes now, I lost my train of thought. I was saying something really interesting. Oh, the Russians, yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the Russians and the Iranians made a military alliance and intervened in Syria on behalf of the Assad regime being the closest ally of Iran. And so the Russians and the Iranians moved in order to prop up the Assad regime. This was a move that was extremely threatening to both Israel and Turkey I'd love attentive students. I'd love to talk about the Turkey dimension of this, but I won't have time, so remember that from questions afterwards. The threatening to both Israel and Turkey. And Obama's policy basically, not in so many words, told both of them, the Israelis and the Turks, to sit down and shut up. Benjamin Netanyahu did not do that. He came to Washington, you'll recall, and the Prime Minister of Israel, and he gave an address before both houses of Congress, in which he said that the nuclear deal with Iran is a bad deal, one that is actually defining a path to a bomb for Iran. And at the same time, there's a certain, this is my words, not his, a certain hidden codicil to the Iran deal, which is recognizing Iran, recognizing Syria as an Iranian sphere of interest. We in the region, we have to be concerned about this rise of Iran. Iran is distributing militias in 4 Arab countries now: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And then it's creating militias on the ground and then distributing to them precision-guided weaponry. So this is freaking out. This is a political science term. It's freaking out the allies in the region, is that they can't believe that the United States is sort of holding the ring around Syria and Yemen and Iraq, and allowing Iran to build up this kind of power. Okay, so that's the Obama worldview. The Trump worldview starts from the same premise as Obama, but it goes down a very different path. And the premise is this: that the United States wants to pull back from the Middle East. It no longer wants to put large numbers of troops on the ground. It wants to avoid military conflict to the extent possible. So just like President Obama thought this through and realized that there was going to be a vacuum, President Obama's answer to what's going to fill the vacuum: a concert system of all the stakeholders in the region. And Trump returns to the idea of the United States leading a coalition designed to contain Iran. But like Obama, he also does not want to have a large U.S. military footprint on the ground. So Obama wants a rebalancing. It's a rebalancing between America's allies and America's enemies, traditional allies to traditional enemies. Trump says, no, the rebalancing has to go on between the United States and its allies. So he's saying to Saudi Arabia and to Israel and to Turkey as well, yes, I am still your ally. Yes, I will work with you to safeguard your interests, but you have to do more, right? That is the space into which the Emiratis and the Israelis, together with the Bahrainis, have moved, and that is the genesis of the peace agreement that we saw on the South Lawn. I'm going to say more about that in a second, but let me say a few words about the Palestinian question. Remember, in the Obama worldview, we had to have a peace process on an Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Remember that was part of the Baker-Hamilton report, the congressionally mandated report on what? On Iraq. So somehow in their mind, think about this, a peace process on Israel is going to help us stabilize Iraq. How? You just have to take my word for it. I don't have enough time to go into it deeply here, but you have to take my word for it that there are 2 different perspectives, just like between the Obama worldview and the Trump worldview. There are 2 different perspectives on Iran. I actually forgot to fill that space in there a little bit. The Trump view of Iran, that Iran is a malevolent power with hegemonic aspirations that is inveterately hostile to the United States and its allies, so that when you create a vacuum and Iran starts to move into it, it doesn't open up a space for diplomacy and agreement with Iran. Iran will just pocket all of the concessions that it gets and then demand more from you because it is always hostile to you, right? So there are two different visions of Iran. There are also two different visions of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Obama worldview says the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of great strategic significance. It also, it is the cause of the conflict also is Israeli policy, not Palestinian policies, and Israeli policies and attitudes, not Palestinian policies and attitudes. So, but even beyond that, it is important for the United States always to be seen to be working to make Arab-Israeli peace, because this is such a symbolically laden conflict in the Islamic world that the association of the United States with Israel in the eyes of Muslims is damaging to the reputation of the United States. The United States is tarnished in the Muslim world by its association with Israel. And so the way that the United States has to contain the reputational damage is by engaging in a peace process with Israel. This is deep in the democratic mindset. That's why John Kerry believes that if we move our embassy to Jerusalem, the region is going to explode. So Donald Trump's view, which is correct, and I say that as a completely objective observer and an expert on the Middle East, with a graduate degree from Princeton University, this is actually a relatively minor geographic conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And what he has been doing while he has been containing Iran and having this dialogue with the allies about rebalancing roles and responsibilities within the alliance, he has also been whittling down the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he has been basically bypassing the Palestinians and saying, you will no longer have a veto over everything that Israel does with the other Arab states. The other Arab states have been happy to take this deal that Trump is offering for two reasons. One, they now see that the world has moved on. The latest generation of Arabs wants a better future. They don't want to be stuck in the paradigms of the past. They want to move forward. They can see that Israel is a healthy, vibrant democracy with an innovative, technologically based economy and so forth. And they see opportunities for themselves, and they would like to enjoy those opportunities. But they also want to vector the United States. They can see that the United States, under Trump as under Obama, is sending great messages of great ambiguity about the American role in the Middle East and about whether America's even going to stick around in the Middle East. And so one way to look at this is that this is a bloc coming together to work with the United States to contain Iran and to realize the potential of Arab and Israeli partnership in doing so. But another way to see it is that this is a bloc that's kind of developing together in the region in order to lobby Washington about what its proper role in the Middle East is. When I started at the beginning, I told you that the New York Times is saying, well, this is just between Israel and Bahrain and the UAE, and these are little minor players. It's not really very significant. Hogwash. The Bahrainis and the UAE would not be doing it if they didn't have the tacit support of Saudi Arabia, which is the single most important country in the Arab world. This is really, the way you should really see this, this is the beginning of a normalization process with Saudi Arabia and with, President Trump told us in the meeting on the White House lawn, 5 other states. Those are probably Kuwait, Oman, Morocco, Qatar, and Sudan, which is quite shocking, actually. So what we're looking at is the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Palestinian, as distinct from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will move on. I mean, we'll live on. There's nothing you can do about that. They'll keep throwing that in Trump's face and saying, well, you haven't solved the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, as if anyone can, right? Nobody can do that. What he's done is he's saying, yes, I can solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, so I'm going to put a ring around it. I'm going to set it off to one side, like Obama did with the Iranian nuclear deal. And I'm going to go about the business of putting together a coalition with Israel and the Arab states. It's practical, it's pragmatic, it's wise, and it's very successful. Now, let me just, Matt over here is making faces at me and screaming and stomping his feet. So let me bring this to an end, but let me bring it to an end with another quote from noted Middle East expert John Kerry. So I'm going to go ahead and answer the question. I'm about to do damage to one of the students here because I told you could ask this question. I'm going to give you a little bit of an explanation. I can still answer in greater depth about how is it that Trump gets it so right when he doesn't have any background in the Middle East. Well, his instincts are right. His instincts are to look after the American interest, to look after the friends of America. He has the same instinct that he doesn't want to be taken advantage of. You hear that all the time, by the friends. But it doesn't mean we don't have friends, but we have to rebalance those. So he listened to the friends. It's as simple as that. It's not that he had brilliant advisors next to him telling him what to do. He talked to Benjamin Netanyahu. He talked to Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE. He talks to Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, and they tell him. And these guys were telling Obama the same thing for years. Just Obama wasn't listening because he knew better, right? Now, what's the proof that they were talking to him? Well, in 2008, the king of Saudi Arabia at the time told America the key is to cut off the head of the snake, meaning Iran. That Iran is the problem. Iran. And then in 2016, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, gave a speech at the United Nations General Assembly. And he said, for the first time in my lifetime, this is 2016, so Obama's still president. For the first time in my lifetime, many other states in the region recognize that Israel is not their enemy. He continued, our common enemies are Iran and ISIS. Our common goals are security, prosperity, and peace. I believe that in the years ahead, we will work together to achieve these goals. Work together openly. Okay? That's a prediction that Benjamin Netanyahu made. Everybody at the time dismissed it, just like they dismissed what Trump is saying, as just so much verbiage from the crazy right-wing Israeli prime minister. Now, here's what John Kerry said immediately after Netanyahu said that. Now, Kerry is still Secretary of State. Before Kerry made the Iran nuclear deal, Kerry devoted the better part of 2 years to trying to broker Israeli-Palestinian peace. He got nothing. He got nothing. All of that senior level leadership of all that time. The most precious thing you have as a senior leader in the American government is your time. All that time he devoted to this conflict, which has no strategic. I'm sorry, say no. I engaged in hyperbole, which I occasionally do. Let me be more measured. It's very important, students, to be very measured in your judgments. It has limited strategic significance, and he devoted. It was his number one priority, and he got nothing for it. And Netanyahu is telling him in the General Assembly, there's another way, John. There's another way. Work to bring Israel and the Arab states together and just forget about the Palestinian question for a while. Kerry goes ballistic, and in a public statement, he says, let me tell you, if you can look this up on the web because it's fun to watch him. He's didactic, and he's telling you with all of his knowledge as Secretary of State. Let me tell you a few things that I've learned for sure in the last few years. This is in public, he's making the statement. There will be no separate peace between Israel and the Arab world. I want to make that very clear to all of you. And then just to make sure that you understand that he's talking directly to Benjamin Netanyahu, he says, I have heard Israeli politicians saying, well, the Arab world is in a different place now. We just have to reach out to them, and we can work some things with the Arab world, and then we'll do a deal, and then after that, we'll do a deal with the Palestinians. Kerry says, no, 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 and no. Well, that belongs in the long list of horrendously bad predictions that John Kerry has made about the Middle East. I'm not singling John Kerry out, because as I say, all of these predictions are backed up by experts on the Middle East, because they all have that same view of the region, which I laid out to you. Donald Trump has a different view, and he is completely impervious to the views of the experts. And it's a very good thing, because what's happening in the Middle East in his tenure is very positive for the people of the region and for the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. We now have some time for Q&A. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone.
Michael, you used the term traditional enemies and traditional allies of the United States. That very phraseology seems to be in contrast to what the early founders, such as George Washington and John Quincy Adams, articulated American foreign policy as resisting entangling alliances. So in this conversation, you mentioned Iran as this major opponent of America in the Middle East. And yet it's worth pointing out that Iran and the Persian Shia, generally speaking, have never committed a terror attack on American soil. The same is not true about Arab Sunni Muslims. And yet, so I guess my question to you is, you were a supporter of the Iraq War. You played a significant role in that policy decision. Can you just run through the logic that you used to defend that war, or have you recanted some of your earlier positions?
Interesting. You're right. I did support the Iraq War, but I had nothing to do with the decision-making about it, even when I was in the White House. I'm not trying to evade your question, just in the interest of accuracy. Yes, I have regrets about the Iraq War and my support for it. I look now and I see that I had certain assumptions about how everything was going to go that were, I made certain John Kerry-style predictions that turned out to be totally false. It never occurred to me, for example, I always regarded Iran as the primary enemy, and I thought that we would use our position in Iraq in order to contain Iran, which I thought would be a good thing, and we never did that. We basically opened up this was never George W. Bush's intention. It was Obama's intention. It was the effect of George Bush's policy that we opened the doors of Iraq to Iranian influence. So I look at all of the lives lost, all of the treasure wasted, and I don't see the strategic advantage that I thought was going to come from this. As far as your larger question is concerned about entanglements, this is not something I can only give it to you. This is a subject of a much larger discussion, the beginning of a much larger discussion. But I'll just give you bullet points here. It's my strong belief that our position in the Middle East is absolutely crucial to defending American freedom at home. And basically, you can read, I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago in Tablet magazine called China's Emerging Middle Eastern Kingdom. And have a look at it, because I lay out the scenario there. If we pull up stakes and just leave the Middle East, China is going to come in and take over, like that, in 2 seconds. China will take over. And China will then dominate the global energy markets. And they will use that domination to basically Finlandize all of Eurasia. They'll take over the Middle East in 2 seconds, and then they'll use that. From that position, they will detach Europe from the United States. And then they will use that position in the global economy then to undermine our own institutions. Have a look at that article. But I think that Trump is walking the line, I think, very intelligently between minimizing the military risk while maintaining the U.S. position, which is crucial in the struggle to contain China.
Hi, I was wondering if you would be willing to touch upon a bit what you think the U.S. relationship should be with, for example, the various Kurdish factions within the Middle East, consisting that in recent years, the Kurdish forces have been absolutely essential with helping U.S. forces on the ground in their war against ISIS and whatnot, and also in maintaining some sort of balance against the Assad regime in Syria. But at the same time, they're also the enemies of our allies, Turkey. So I just was wondering if you'd be willing to comment on that relationship.
I'd love to. That's, again, the beginning of a very large conversation. But fortunately, there's another article of mine that I can direct you to, which I published about a week ago with the Hoover Institution and their online magazine called Caravan. Just look up Duran, that's my name, Mr. Magoo. And that's the beginning of the discussion there. Just again, in a nutshell, when Obama aligned with Iran in the region, he aligned with Iran across the board, including in the Kurdish arena. There's no Americans often say Kurds, Kurds, Kurds. I like the Kurds. I want Kurdish autonomy. There's no such thing as Kurds. Saying Kurd is like saying Arab. The question is which Arabs, and in particular which organizations. So what the United States did when it aligned with Iran is it aligned with the PKK, which is the enemy of Turkey. It wants to bust up Turkey into two states. Now, I go in the article, I explain how we did this and how we dressed it up and pretended that we weren't doing that when we did. We are still aligned to this day with the PKK. And that has done more than anything to damage our relations with Turkey. Now, there was another option. The Barzani faction in the KRG, in the Iraqi Kurdistan, is anti-PKK, and it has good relations with the Turks. So if we had, what we should have done, we borrowed, the PKK was the natural ally of Assad, Russia, and Iran. And we borrowed the PKK to defeat ISIS because it did not threaten Iran and Russia, because we were recognizing Syria tacitly as an Iranian-Russian sphere of influence. The cost of that, just like the cost of the policy was to alienate the Israelis and the Saudis because we elevated Iran. The cost in the northern Syria was that we alienated the Turks because we aligned with the PKK. So what I think Turkey is the strategic prize, and Turkey, Obama detached Turkey. Obama tells a story about each ally that focuses on their moral failings. So when Netanyahu raised his head above the parapet and said, "Don't align with Iran," Obama said, "You're oppressing the Palestinians." When Saudi Arabia made a peep, it was you are an Islamic extremist despotism. You need to reform and democratize at home. When the Turks raised a peep, it was you're murdering Kurds and you're tacitly supporting ISIS, right? None of these is true. Each one takes a little sliver of reality and then blows it up into an indictment of our allies. in the case of the Turks, the single worst thing that Obama did in the Middle East, I think, actually, was to detach Turkey from the American alliance system. Everyone is understanding that these days. I'm an outlier here. By the way, I'm the only guy in Washington, or one of the few in Washington, that makes this argument. I'm an outlier on this, but I'm right. I'm objective, and remember that I have an advanced degree from Princeton University. So anyway, there's a much larger discussion. It's very interesting, but I better stop there because I could go on forever.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Good evening. I just wanted to know, if we continue with the Trump approach, which you say is the correct approach, what does the Middle East look like in, say, 20 years? And does it open up an avenue to solving the Israeli-Palestine conflict?
The simple answer is it opens up an avenue. It creates a better chance of reaching an Israeli-Palestinian deal than the other framework. The other framework incentivized the Palestinians always to say no. If you go back from Oslo to the I don't know if these terms mean anything to you, but at each stage, we offered every time the Palestinians said no, we offered them more, or we used our influence to get the Israelis to offer them more. So there was what Rabin was offering the Palestinians in the mid-90s. Then there's what Barak offered in 2000. Then there are the Clinton parameters, which Clinton came out with after Barak, after the Second Intifada started. And then there's Olmert's offer in 2008. And each time we put pressure on the Israelis, because remember, we're defining the problem as Israel, not the Palestinian intransigence, it's Israel. We put pressure on the Israelis to come up with more. And then as Barack Obama is leaving the White House in 2009, you remember he kicked the Israelis with a UN resolution that recognized the 4 June 67 boundaries as an international boundary, which they never were. They were the armistice lines of 1949. These were the ceasefire lines behind which the Israelis, the 4 June 67 lines before the war in 67 were the armistice lines of 1949. These are not international boundaries. Obama was turning them into an international boundary. Trump is erasing that. So if you're the Palestinians and you're sitting there, if you're Abu Mazen and you're watching, all I have to do is sit here like an amoeba and say, no, 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 it's not enough to any offer that's made, and the Americans will come back and offer me something better. So, of course, you're just going to continue to sit there and say no. I mean, to the extent that this kind of negotiation is a rational activity between actors who are trying to come to a deal. Now, having said all that, I don't believe the Palestinian leadership can make a deal. So I, Mike Duran, am not going to hold my breath until the Palestinians come forward and say yes. But if you ask the question as you did, then there's a much better chance in the Trump formula, because the world is now moving on. And the Palestinians have been offered something that approximates what they've been offered in the past. It's not as good, but it approximates, and they can negotiate for better if they want. And the world is moving on. If they don't want to take it, they don't take it. As Trump says, I'm okay either way, right? That's a healthier place for America to be, because there's no reason why our policy in the region should be hamstrung by the Palestinian question. It makes no sense.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Duran.